Okay, so we're gathered for another sculpture forum, and we're gathered via Zoom, and I'm joined by my regular compatriots, Jock Ireland and Brandt Junceau, and we're delighted to have with us on this occasion Lydia Gladkova, wonderful young sculptor, and Michael Brenson, the distinguished author, critic, curator, historian. Michael, Lydia, thank you both for joining us. We are being recorded and will be edited and posted by the delightful Nicole Oliveira. Thank you, Nicole, for doing this. And we've been to see an exhibition of work by Mary Ann Unger at Barry Campbell Gallery in Chelsea. And this is an exhibition that I'm delighted to see because I was aware of Marianne Unger's work, although she is not has not been well known for some time. She died prematurely at the age, I think, of about 53. Died in uh, 98, I believe. But she left a substantial body of work. The major work, and the title of this exhibition is Crossing the Bering Strait. And that title refers to a major work that is in this show, which comprises about 10 units, each unit comprising two or three or four or five elements. And it is an amazing and very impressive piece of work, but there are many other things in the exhibition that I really, really enjoyed as well. So I'm going to open it up to anybody who wants to jump in. Please, somebody. Okay, Michael.
So it's me, huh? Um,
Yes.
yeah, I can, I can put a couple of things on the table briefly. Uh, I was very interested in the show. I'd seen sculptures by Marianne in the 80s, I guess mid to late 80s, and after that, so I was familiar with some of these works when they came into the world, but I haven't seen it in a while, and I certainly haven't seen it in a group like this. I uh, and was eager to, and I'm really interested in where this conversation will go. I guess the installation itself confused me a little bit. I think it has a little bit of the dilemma of Barry Campbell shows when they bring in artists and they show them for the first time, and they want to bring in some kind of reveal some kind of or picture some kind of comprehensive view of the work. So they're trying to show a lot of things, but a lot of things can't be shown, and I don't know sometimes where it actually lands. So there are pockets of the show, and then, as Garth said, there's the major work and at the end across the Bering Strait. So I guess what I want to say is questions. I feel like their works there's the modeling work, there's the work, the more modular work, and in where the hand is less evident, and then there's the kind of epic piece at the end. Is a like I'm interested in the pieces like the basket and the well and the wishing stones and maybe a little bit of the head too, where I feel there's a kind of fantasy in the work, something really surprising in terms of imagination and in terms of scale. And then I don't know about the big piece because it's an epic piece. It's a piece that tries to be epic, and it comes out a little bit out of the blue for me because there's nothing in the show leading up to that would suggest her concern with these overt concern with these global issues and issues of migration and trying to find some kind of epic form for them. So a lot of the show feels more private, and then suddenly we're thrown into this really public, and epic sculpture. And I wonder about the installation itself. Like, I wonder if, like, it's in the back gallery and it's spread out a little bit. It's spread out the way it is. I wonder if it had been installed in the corridor there where they avoided it. In other words, where you have a kind of succession and obsessive, like relentless quality to the movement that would fill the that would carry people along with it rather than spreading it out the way it is. And then the only other thing I'll raise with that is that I wish that there had been more sense of her large scale work, because I think that that would have prepared a little bit more for Across the Bering Strait. And so I wonder if in that corridor and in a separate gallery, they could have even included photographs of a number of the larger pieces and a number of her attempts to work in a public realm. Because as it is now, I feel between the private and sort of fantasy pieces and then suddenly this explosion of the monumental epic work at the end, there's not enough of a transition or a build up toward it.
Interesting. Okay. Lydia,
Yes.
what's your
Yeah, I was on the contrary most interested in the big piece. I thought when I looked up the show online that it's bronze, and it wasn't, and I was very much relieved to see that it's not bronze. It was very touching. Now, what Michael said about obsessiveness was very appealing to me. Rapping is always obsessive. And I am very interested. It said that I read the description of the show. It said that it was an early installation, but she thought of it as one piece. And I'm very interested in that. How did she decide that it's one piece? And I don't know, it wasn't that epic. It was quite intimate to me. And I saw some humor in it too. I don't know, are they painted to look like bronze? Was it her intention for them to look like bronze? So yeah, I would rather concentrate on that. I didn't want to leave that room.
Okay.
And it was very inviting. I wanted to look between them and even step over them, whatever. So yeah.
Good. Jock?
Well, I certainly enjoyed the show. Her work is brand new to me, and it's interesting, sort of having lived through her time, and never having seen her work. I don't know, thinking about the work and the history behind it is interesting to me, and I see it as work that sort of began, or this kind of work began, or I see it as beginning with David Smith and Caro, and the impulse to make something new, something out of new materials, and just a whole new way of thinking about sculpture, and that I'm saying it began with Smith, but it's continued through at least through her work, and I think of it as I'm not. I think the sort of one word summary would be wonderful. It's great that a whole bunch of people started making sculpture in a kind of new way, and I find the work wonderful, and I find it wonderful because I think they found it wonderful. They sort of couldn't believe that they were actually making sculpture, and yet they knew they were, and that kind of surprise, excitement uh, 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 is what made me think of that. Those are that the show brought that response out of me, and yeah, I happen to be reading this book called "The Emergence of the Classical Style in Greek Sculpture," and
by whom?
Sorry,
by whom?
Richard Neer. He's a big time art historian at Chicago. Yeah, and it's a good book. But the thing I haven't finished it, but I'm in the early part. He talks about the archaic Greek kouroi, those big standing figures, and he talks about them in terms of wonder, and he goes on quite wonderfully about this idea of wonder, and I'm connecting those ancient Greek sculptures with this kind of work. This same sort of sense of wonder.
Jock, sorry, Brandt, do you want to jump in?
I wish, Jock, I were getting that sense of wonder. I mean, for me, like big picture, the exhibition seems kind of a lesson, or whatever, to us as artists, the sort of benefits and the disadvantages of being of one's time. So I think that like she had this industrious career larger than I knew of. I mean, Michael's intro sort of gave me a better idea of it. But and that's kind of encouraged, nurtured by speaking to one's time, in its language and being understood. But the disadvantage there is that when something is so understandable and so ready for consumption, it's a lighter experience. So I don't find the kind of urgency and mystery and discovery in this work that I do in, for instance, Eva Hesse's work, which touches on some of the same tropes, but they're I don't know, they're occasions or openings toward a more unpredictable, kind of driven and mysterious experience.
Why would you be so dismissive of something that's so clearly touching and personal? And I don't
know. Because for me, it isn't. It's, I feel like it's earnest, yes, but is it like what Berryman calls poetic diction? Yeah, I think it's it's light.
I don't think, Brandt, I'm not sure when this work came out that it was, her reputation has continued to grow. I think that it wasn't particularly significant in the 80s and then early 90s. There were like maybe there were always a group of people who were aware of the work, but there's a kind of fierce independence and determination about the work, and that she had. So she was going to make it no matter what, right? There is I don't know if urgency, I understand your word, but certainly there's a necessity in making it. And she was making it, but it wasn't like there was an awful lot of stuff like this going on at the same time. So it's more legible now, 20, 30 years after the fact than it was then. And I'm interested in what you say about the materials and Eva Hess, because Hess has had such a strong relationship to the materials she works with, and Unger works with very different kinds of materials, and Hess had a very, I think, historical sense or historical relationship to the materials. In other words, that working with the materials brought out a certain relationship that she had to history, and that relationship to history was a very deep one. And I don't know, I mean, that was very rare. I don't know if you want to talk about that, if we feel the same sort of thing, and with Marianne and in the use of fiberglass and the use of metal, or whatever. But I think it's an important question, just what her relationship is to the materials that she's using.
Yeah.
And also the question of labor, because that too, they're immensely invested, like across the Bering Strait. There's no question about the amount of time that she put into these things, and there's no question about the relationship of her hand to the work. But I think it's I think we can ask questions about how that actually functions.
Yeah, it's the driving force, and she made these things with not literally her own two hands, but with her very limited resources. It was sort of bare bones, necessary kind of work. She had sort of no money and all that kind of thing, but she had to make these things, and that I just like Lydia, I thought they were bronze, or I thought that Bering Strait piece was bronze, and it was really surprising to me to see that it wasn't bronze, and to my response to the material was it was very different from my response to Hess's materials. There's kind of I don't know, it's complicated with Hesse. It's materials are somehow dangerous, and the materials themselves matter, whereas the materials in Unger's work, they're her materials, and it's her intimate relation to the making of these things, and it's the making of them, the touching them, the hugging them, that comes across.
Yeah, I just want to, I agree. And to also relate to what Lydia said, I think there's a lot of courage in this work. I think certainly she has the courage of her convictions, and what she wanted to do, she went for. And that's that's a part of the work, and I think it's part of what we feel in relation to it.
Yes, I agree with Jock too. And to me, it stands alone. I don't know how it was made, but if I had to guess, I would say that it was made in isolation. I wasn't thinking of it as, I'm thinking mostly of the big piece. It was made in the context of the time or something. I was thinking of her, as Jock said, an intimate relationship with what was in front of her.
Can you see this if I hold it up to the, I don't know what, can you see this work?
Not well.
I'm just holding up a little sculpture of hers.
Hmm.
I don't know if can you see it?
I think I've seen photographs of it, Michael.
It's just like an intensely modeled small work of a figure, a large-breasted figure with her arms, with huge hands and her arms extended, and I kind of wanted to show it to you because there is a whole expressionist dimension to her work through the human figure that doesn't show up in the show at all, and it's and it also reinforces what Lydia is saying about a certain kind of intimacy. And here you can definitely see it in the modeling, even if it's just a kind of sketch or whatever. But I wish that there was more in the show of this particular side of her work. Can you see it, Brandt? I don't know.
I'm trying. I have a very small image.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it's a small
It's
work.
funny. It reminds me of a certain piece of Lachaise, which
Right.
which is really totally unexpected from what I saw in the exhibition.
I didn't agree with Michael. I think you were making a major distinction between the large crossing the Bering Strait work and the other things in the exhibition. I didn't find any significant break there. I thought there were lots of things in the exhibition that could be thought to lead up to the Bering Strait piece. While I think Marianne Unger herself and the gallery are promoting that work in terms of, a relevant, important contemporary issue of migration, I didn't find it necessary to view the piece. It didn't seem to me that that was, um, you know, uh, important to my experience of the piece. Like Lydia, I found myself, mostly engaged by that piece, and I had some quibbles with it, but on the whole, I thought absolutely amazing and wonderful piece of work. My quibbles were, I mean, I knew it wasn't bronze. I had seen some parts of it before in an exhibition that I shared. Where I think up in Saratoga at Skidmore College, Marianne and I were in an exhibition together, and Mary showed not the whole of that piece, but some of the elements. And it interested me then that I didn't know there was more to it. So she was willing to show, parts of that rather than having to show always the entire thing. That speaks to Lydia, I think's concern. My quibbles were I would have liked a greater variation in the color. The color is subtle and varied slightly, it could have been, without being outrageously varied, it could have been more complex. And I was a little concerned. These works, I think, you will see, are composed of a supporting element and then other elements which are held up and supported by a kind of much more stumpy, smaller piece. And the way those supporting elements meet the ground bothered me slightly. It's always very consistent, and they just end where they meet the ground, without any sense that they're going into the ground or that they stop where they meet the ground. And that bothered me slightly. I thought there could have been a lot more attention paid to how those things actually managed to rise up from the ground, or are weighed down by the things they're supporting. but I really thought that was and I didn't. It doesn't. I mean, it doesn't seem to me. I think several people have made comments that the work somehow there seems of its era, and I guess the implication there is that it feels slightly dated. I didn't have that sense at all. I don't have that sense at all. I don't have it with any of the work in the show, really. I think that it all has a kind of surprising immediacy to it. Okay, that's so, yeah.
Garth, the question you raised, though, it's a question I have about the big piece, and that is what I would, call like I wish it had more individuation. Like these are all kind of, there's a somewhat generic quality to it, and so I wish I felt that there was more particularity in each of these bodies, like each of the experience, but it kind of levels out so that they're all, more or less the same thing. And I think this question of individuation through the individual forms, through the supports, through all of it. What if that had been different? What if we were clearly looking all the way through at forms that had their own reality, that weren't swept up in a larger idea of migrational forces, where in the end, this kind of individuality is lost. But I felt it as a question at the very least.
Yeah, I can hear that, and I can sympathize with it. Although my experience was actually to become um, mildly engaged in looking at the differences between the various elements, and I think there is, there is in the work throughout an issue of repetition. And this ties in with people were referencing. I'm sorry, it's gone out of my head, but you know who I mean. And I think that issue of repetition and variation is something that occurs, in more than one instances in this show. And often there are smaller pieces where the are composed of many units which are identical. The units are identical uh, in several of those smaller works. But in Crossing the Bering Straits, the units are by no means identical, although they are all of a generic similarity. And yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I think there could have been greater variation. I'm not sure, though, Michael, if each element or each unit becomes distinctly itself, uh, the thing holds together in the same way.
Yeah, I look at the Bering Strait thing as perfect. It's flawless, and I think she died very young. Uh, uh, the work in the show ranges from sort of uh, what everybody was doing in the 70s with this sort of modular conceptual thing, and it changed. It moved away from a kind of 70s thing, and it engaged with, or at least began to engage with, I don't know, neo-expressionism and identity politics, all kinds of sort of complex things that didn't get sort of perfectly organized, but were bubbling within her. And the Bering Strait doesn't say everything about her, but it it's perfect, and the head and the piece that Michael was showing us, there was all kinds of things sort of about to emerge from her that I, as I say, I don't want to correct mistakes in the Bering Strait. I think it works just fine, and had she lived longer, she would have made different things.
Well, I don't think it's a question of correcting. I mean, my quibbling with it wasn't a question of correcting mistakes. It was a question of trying to come to terms with it, in its complexity, and and the sense that it is both busy and relaxed, that it is urgent and at peace, that it is charged and at the same time neutral. That it was these aspects of it that really kind of found me really engaged with it.
Yeah, that's right, and that's sort of part of what Richard Neer talks about in the ancient Greek work. It's this balance of presence and absence, carving stone away to create a presence. Those sort of contradictory things going on at the same time. That's at the heart of the ancient Greek stuff, and her Marianne's stuff too, or the best stuff of hers.
So what do we like looking at? She's working with very, very big and very dramatic gestures, right? The weight, the carrying, the bandaging, the wounding, the transport, the kind of pilgrimage, the journey. I mean, these are big ideas. They're big themes. They have some kind of universal appeal. They've existed throughout history. Many painters and sculptors have dealt with them, and I think it's bold on her part to take all that on. I'm still asking the question about, since she is working within that language, if for me they need to be particularized a little bit more, so that the gestures, and they're very gestural works in the particular sculptures, from sculpture to sculpture, have a kind of variety, and where I feel that the bodies themselves are particular bodies more than they are. So we have different responses to this, and it's interesting to me. But how does one work with a language that a very theatrical sort of powerful, emotional, and universalized? Because I think she is looking for a universal language. Like how does that get particularized enough? And obviously you're saying, Jock, and Lydia too, that this works for you completely. I'm just suggesting that for me, I feel if you're going to work with that language, that maybe it has to be particularized a little bit more.
I just felt tender towards it. I remember when I was listening to Brandt's brutal assessment, I felt like defending it and protecting it, and I think she felt too, given this wrapping and bandaging. I don't know why would she do that. It was all she was working around what's inside, right? I felt defensive and I felt tender towards this work, and I felt like defending and protecting it in the face of Brandt's brutal assessment. And I thought that the author felt that too, felt, oh, this is what this wrapping and bandaging is about, which is to me very moving. And what else can you ask for? You go to a show, you want to be moved.
I'm not sure if Brandt, you want to respond to that, but I want to go back to the one of the things Michael wrote right at the beginning of making a significant distinction between most of the works in the show and the major piece, Crossing the Bering Strait. And I think earlier I said that I didn't find a huge kind of leap or separation between that work and the other things in the show. Although I have to admit that there is obviously it seems to me that in the Crossing the Bering Strait work there is a potential element of narrative. I mean, you could make up, as we have, an indication of a sort of what it's about, as it were, a story. And that's not easy to do in most of the other work in the show. I didn't find it necessary to do that myself. I didn't find, and it didn't get in my way, which it could do, I think, Anyway, I'm just throwing that out.
Yeah, I in the earlier works, narrative, it's a good word, because in the Across the Bering Strait, there's a sort of grand thematics in that work, like an attempt to make a work that exists in the world in a very particular way. And what I see is heroic and epic, regardless of how intimate she wanted it to be in terms of the experience. And the other work, the work that leads up to that in the other galleries, it's kind of hard to get to that kind of political ambition, world ambition way of being in the world. And all I was saying in part, like, there are works of hers that have existed on a different scale. And I felt like if there were images of those works in the show as well, perhaps between the East and West Gallery, and then on the processional, toward the end, it would have helped me to some degree. Is it a big deal? I'm not sure. But I think since everything, it is the culmination of the show, the kind of, it is where the show is going, and where the show is, I think, trying to justify the stature of her position in the art world. I feel like there are ways of getting there that could have been a little bit more subtle and evolved, and they would have helped me.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I think you're right about. I mean, I think the show is organized, as it were, around that major work, and organized in order to somehow, as you indicate, I think, Michael, to lead up to that major work, and I think it does a good job in that respect. I was convinced by the show that things were leading there. Um, uh,
And
and
you don't think if there had been, like, they had, because they don't put work in that corridor right through the gallery, as opposed to like Gallery Lalonde, which does that. If the Across the Bering Strait has been a processional, like down the middle of the gallery, so you're walking with it, so that this kind of inevitability that seems so important to the piece and the idea of migration in the world were something one could move with or get involved with. I don't know. I'm just saying, for me, I think, and then in that big room, they could have put something else. So I'm just saying that the way it's laid out there, sort of this way, if it had been a processional, might have been a more effective installation idea for me.
Well, it's possible, isn't it? I mean, I guess we won't ever know. It's a hypothetical, and it's hard to respond to a hypothetical. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it was not. Yeah, I mean, in a different space or a different organization, it could have been quite a different experience. And perhaps more alive. I'm not sure. Um, the other element aside from narrative potentially in that piece is a kind of not sure what the word is, but I want to say theatricality. Um, um, and I was struck by this because I did manage to get to the opening, and at some point during the opening, the gallery stretched a tape across the entrance to that end gallery, so that people could no longer enter into it because I think people were, it was rather crowded, and people were in there, and there was a concern for the safety of the work and for the safety of the guests. So at some point, there was a tape across that to stop people going into the space, but a whole crowd of people looking into it over the tape. And that struck me as a very kind of dramatic kind of setup. And I wonder what Marianne Unger would have thought about it. I imagine she wanted people to be able to get close and walk in amongst those things. And not have it as a display like that. But I don't know.
Yeah, that would have been a loss, huh?
Sorry, Lydia.
I said that would have been a loss.
Yes, I think so, very much so. Yeah.
Do you think we could come back to this question of wonder? Because I feel it was important what Jock raised as something that he felt very strongly in relation to the show, and Brandt feeling that he didn't, that it was a kind of lack for him. I can we go further with that to try to tease out why, and I think, Lydia felt it certainly very strongly with the last piece, what the difference is, or what explains the difference between these quite radically different responses to the work.
Well, I'd like to know more about what is meant by wonder in this context. Jock, I think that's your word.
Well, it's Richard Neer, and he could bring out all kinds of Greek words and elaborate, convincing talk about wonder. And I just
Hey, what do you think?
Sorry?
What do you think? Not Richard Neer, whoever.
Yeah, well, my response to her show, the Unger show, has left me looking at a whole lot of work that I'm talking about as beginning with David Smith and going through all of the sort of work that has gotten attention over the last 50, 75 years. The what is thought of as contemporary art. And it's something that I, like Brandt, am a little impatient with, sort of instinctively. But I'm certainly, this show has caused me to rethink my I don't know, doubts or whatever about contemporary art, and it's just this sense that it's a daring thing to try to make sculpture. And how do you, if you call yourself a sculptor, are you sort of calling yourself a Michelangelo, a great genius or whatever? And a whole lot of people over the last 75 years, whatever, said sort of no to that Michelangelo trip, and just with the sort of most elementary, basic, whatever tools, started to make sculpture, and ended up making some really wonderful sculpture. And it's just that sense of trying a new material and putting things together in a way that people haven't thought of as a sculptural way of putting things together. That's my sense of wonder.
I think with Unger, I mean, I don't see so much Smith and Caro in it. I definitely see like certain notions of eccentric abstraction that grew up in the late 60s, a sort of, very strong feminist impulse that, Eva Hesse is definitely there. But it's interesting to me to bring up Michelangelo because I think the gestural, again, what I'm saying is this heroic sort of gestural language in the across the Bering Straits seems to be almost an attempt to start with a certain relation to materials, soft materials, and abstraction, and Eva Hesse, and then bring in the kind of sculptural tradition, that goes back to Michelangelo, that is not at all compatible, or at least is not thought of at all in relation to the traditions of sculpture where she began. And that is like that's interesting. That, I can even feel in the weight of those bodies and the way they're carried, I can make connections to certain images of Michelangelo. And that she would want to do that, or try to do that within the language of minimalism and abstraction that she began with. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah, that's it exactly. And there was a piece, I think it's called Ganesha, the blue thing, and she made a lot of things sort of like that are kind of standing figures that can't stand. They have to lean against the wall. They have to be hugged to make sure that they don't fall over. That's it. And that, she broke away from a sort of 70s kind of coolness into this Michelangelo zone.
Well, the 70s was different things. I think, the kind of post-minimalism had minimalist elements, but there was a real, Joel Shapiro comes out of that too, where there's also a very expressionist. So there was a kind of attempt to do something with the modularity, the impersonality of minimalism, and bring it back into a much more personal and much more expressionist vein. But I don't want to monopolize this, but just in terms of wonder, and I don't know if Lydia and Brandt want to jump in, but when I use the word fantasy at the beginning, that's a little bit what I had in mind. Like I felt that in those pieces that I mentioned, the basket, the well, maybe the blue head, I'm not sure, that there was something surprising, a kind of discovery that took place in the making, and in relation to the imagery, and above all in relation to the scale, that again seemed to come out of a certain realm of imagination. And that's where, to me, the word wonder might come into it.
So wonder in the sense of a revelation, a wonder.
I think she is very much not like Eva Hesse. Eva Hesse was experimenting with the materials like Jock described, but this work that we saw in Marianne and Unger show, to me, was coming from a personal urge. The sense that I was not getting in Eva Hesse's work, and it's a big difference.
If she's not experimenting with the materials, then what is her relationship to the materials?
She's using them. She's just using them. These are the materials. That's what it is for her.
And materials that you feel that she didn't have a particularly close relationship to?
I think she had a relationship with her actions, with a series of actions, like wrapping, that was important. Rather than the materials.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that the relationship of material in Hess is very different, very different. They're both using similar materials often. A liquid that hardens. But I think in Hess's case, the work comes out of the material in a way that isn't the case with
and you're good with that, Garth. You don't feel that there's any issue of that with Unger's work, because that relationship to materials is maybe less of a process of discovery, that she's, as Lydia said, she's primarily using the material.
Yes, I don't have a problem with it. I do think that is the case. Yeah. No, it's not for me an issue. It may be that it is a much more kind of ordinary worldly relationship to the material, whereas in Hess's case, somehow that she manages to do something that it is really a revelation. And almost as if it happens in spite of her. Whereas I think Marianne Unger is much more in control, and her relationship to her materials is much more kind of, I'd say, ordinary and practical, businesslike.
But don't you think that in the Bering Straits piece that there's a particular, like with Eva Hess, the relationship with history is a profound one. What she does with materials gives her access to the histories that are part of her. In the Bering Strait, that's a piece that moves into historical territory and themes in a way that I'm not sure many of the other pieces in the show do. But where the relationship with materials would seem to it would seem to be important that relationship actually moves her into that historical zone. And so when the materials are something that's just used, or even, there's an idea of bandaging there, but the relationship with materials is more distant. I just wonder if that's a problem in a piece that might be calling for a different relationship to history.
You jump quickly to history from materials. I mean, to oversimplify it, I think Hesse's relationship with materials is almost trivial. She's just interested in the materials themselves. She doesn't sort of shape things. Whereas Unger, she uses the material to shape things. She makes forms. And
she always knows exactly what she's doing. And
sorry?
She always knows what she's doing.
Who?
Unger. And that's not a recipe for wonder.
Sorry?
She knows what she's doing, and that's not a recipe for wonder.
Okay. Well, I don't think she knows what she's doing. She's discovering as she works.
No, that's it. Her facture is absolutely earnest, but it's methodical, no self-contradiction, no accidents, and it comes to a conclusion. And it comes to the same conclusion over a number of repetitions or permutations. So, I mean, that's not revelatory.
Well,
and if you want to make a work about the transmigration of souls across geography, that's a cosmic subject far beyond our scope. And there's no way to realize it without an element of uncertainty.
well, I see plenty of uncertainty, plenty of adventure, daring in that one piece, and certainly in the whole show. There goes from it goes from work that is I don't know, settled and in safe territory of the 70s, and sort of diagrams and whatnot, but it moves slowly into territory that's full of uncertainty, where she is not sure about what she's doing, and she, the humor in that head is, maybe questionable or whatever, but it's a real step into unknown territory, unfamiliar territory for her, and that sort of continual, that she's open, trying to do new things.
I'd like to jump in,
Yeah,
Brandt.
please.
Brandt, what you said is quite damning, I think, and I think quite unkind. Because I think you set up this kind of goal, this cosmic subject, and then
I didn't set it up.
no, well, wait a minute, and then you say she fails to to achieve something worthy in light of it. I wonder. I speculate, I should say, about whether the Crossing the Bering Strait was the title of this work before the work existed, or whether the title came sometime during the production of the work or at the end conclusion of the work. I mean, I don't know that she set out to make a work of global importance. I don't know that she set out to do that. I don't know to what extent the ambition of this work was laid out in advance of the beginning production. I rather doubt it, actually. I mean, I imagine that there are other things in the show which suggest that she was playing around with this idea of one element supporting a number of others, or one other, and just what that relationship could be, this awkward kind of uncertain, ambiguous relationship between, dependence and support. And she made one of these things, and she decided to make another, and she decided to make another, and then another, and then she thought, well, something's happening here, and she began to construct a reason for its existence, rather than it being the other way around, as you implied in your damning statement, Brandt.
I just want to, defend. I think it's really important that we all speak, right? And we all say what we think. So I have, I'm not sure, Garth, with what you're saying about, what your own criticism of what Brandt is saying is. Because I love the fact that this conversation is completely open, and I wouldn't want anything to get in the way of that.
Oh, I'm sorry if you thought I was trying to shut Brandt down. I'm sorry. Absolutely not. No, I love it. I love it. I love it that we disagree.
Okay.
Guys, did you say you knew her personally?
I mean, not well. I had met her on more than one occasion. I can't remember how many times we met after we met at the exhibition that we were both in, but I know we did meet more than once after that, just to follow up, have a cup of coffee, and see what was happening. But at that time, it seemed to me Mary and was very unhappy being now understand. She never disclosed to me that she was seriously ill. So when I learned that, I reflected on our meetings and reevaluated them entirely. Yeah. Anyway, no, that's neither here nor there.
I think, that I probably agree with you about the way that the big work took shape. I don't think that there was an ambition, I don't think the idea of the work, the ambition of the work, she started with that. I think it moved quite organically toward that. I agree with you. But then at a certain point, there's enormous ambition in that piece, and it's a different kind of ambition that we see in any of the other work in the show. I don't know whether she saw it as a culmination, which would be interesting, of this different ways of working and then coming together in a large idea. But she was trying to bite off something that was really, really big, and regardless of how she got there.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a big gap maybe between her ambitions and the ambitions of a whole lot of people. I'm saying it begins with Smith, but the ambitions and the sort of tools that they allowed themselves to work with are, that's I'm looking forward to getting further into this Richard Neer book, in that he's talked about archaic Greek art, but he's talking about the emergence of the classical style from the archaic Greek stuff. And I'm wondering if, the sort of next 50, 100 years, we're going to go from this, what will appear to be an archaic period into something more complex.
And how does this relate to Marianne?
Well, she's, I have some sympathy with Brandt's sort of position, to the extent that I understand it. There's, well, there are limits to, the a lot of the work that has been getting attention for the last 75 years, and those limitations are real, and how we're going to get past that is, I don't know, but it might be, there might be tips or whatever in this Richard Neer, or looking at history from a long time ago.
Just letting you guys know, we have about 8 minutes left in this call.
My goodness. Well, we've talked for quite a long time, haven't we?
Yeah,
I guess we should try and wrap it up. Otherwise, so is anybody? Yeah, I mean, I'm Jock. I'm not at all sure that I understand what you mean by limits to a lot of the work that's been made in the last 75 years and so on. Let's not open that up.
Right.
Let's try and just finish on Marianne Unger on this show, and I mean, I think what we've perhaps revealed in our exchanges is that it's a rich experience, and that you can find yourself quite enthralled by it, or you can find yourself somewhat disappointed in that I think for somebody like Brandt, it seems all a little kind of predictable. Is that fair, Brandt? I'm not sure. Putting words in your mouth here.
Yeah, I mean, that's fair enough.
All right.
I think that, maybe I could just add, I mean, to me, it's been a good discussion because a lot of the issues of the work have been brought out. She also clearly, since this is the sculpture forum, she clearly believed in sculpture, right? And clearly believed in what sculpture could do and was pushing the boundaries of what was possible for her within it. And I think there's something commendable about it, and she and always courageous. So I think, for a sculpture forum, she's been a really good person for us to talk about.
Yes, thank you, Michael. I think that's a wonderful summary, and let's leave it there. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nicole.